The Whispering Field. There was a place just beyond the village that people didn't speak of after dark, a flat, windswept field bordered by brittle trees that creaked even when there was no wind. They called it the Hollow, though no one remembered why. It was neither hollow nor remarkable. Just grass. Just silence. The sky above it always seemed dimmer even on bright days. The clouds hung lower. The crows that passed overhead never circled, never landed. At night, the wind made odd patterns through the tall weeds, soft enough to be ignored, but sometimes, if you stood very still, it sounded like murmuring. Just the wind, they always said. Mara had lived in the village all her life. She was quiet, always had been. The kind of quiet that listens and remembers. When her grandmother died, Mara was left the old cottage at the edge of the village, the one closest to the hollow. She moved in the spring when the trees were still bare and the ground held the chill of winter. The cottage was small and crooked, with soft wooden floors and a wood-burning stove that sighed more than it burned. But it was hers. Each evening, Mara sat on the porch in her grandmother's old chair with a wool blanket and a cup of tea. From there, she could see the edge of the hollow, gray grass bending in soft waves, the trees swaying like sleepers shifting in their dreams. It was peaceful. Until it wasn't. The first strange thing was the footprints. They appeared one morning just beyond her fence. Not made by boots or animals, but something else, bare, narrow, deeply pressed. As though someone had walked out from the tall grass barefoot in the frost. They ended at the fence facing the cottage. Mara stood over them, her breath showing in the morning air. She said nothing. She only looked. The second thing was the sound. At night, after the fire had gone out and the house was dark, she would lie in bed and hear something faint. Not footsteps. Not wind. Something between the two. A brushing. A whispering almost too soft to notice. She tried to tell herself it was the trees. She began locking her doors at night, though no one in the village ever did. She began leaving a candle lit beside the bed, though she didn't believe in ghosts. Not yet. One night, near the end of summer, she woke just after midnight. The candle had burned down, leaving a soft orange halo around the wick. The whispering was louder. Clearer. Not words, never words, but something that wanted to be. She got up, crossed the creaking floor, opened the back door. The field was a sea of dark silver. The wind had stopped. The trees had stopped. The world was still. And yet the whispering came. Not from the trees. Not from the wind. From beneath the field. As though the earth was breathing stories it could no longer keep. She stood at the edge of the grass, barefoot in the dew, her nightdress hanging still against her legs. She should have gone back inside. Instead, she stepped forward. The grass parted around her. The earth was soft, but not wet. She walked slowly, following nothing, following everything. The whispering grew no louder, yet it was all she could hear. She reached the center of the hollow. And there, the ground dipped just slightly. Only enough to notice if you were standing still. She was still. There was a hush then, deeper than silence. Then she knelt. She never knew why. It was like remembering something she had never learned. Like responding to a call she couldn't hear but had always known. She pressed her hand to the soil. It was warm. Not sun warm, but living warm. Like the skin of something sleeping. And it sighed. Not the wind. Not her breath. The ground exhaled beneath her palm. She stood suddenly, heart like a bird in her chest, and stumbled backward, away from the dip, away from the warmth. The whispering stopped. The field returned to silence. She walked back to the cottage, slowly, never running, never looking back. She climbed into bed without brushing off the dirt on her hands. The candle had gone out. She let the darkness stay. Morning came. The sun was pale and thin. The field looked like any other field. The dip was gone. Mara didn't go back. But the whispers came to her now. Soft, familiar, curling into her thoughts as she chopped wood, as she stirred her tea, as she folded blankets. Not frightening. Not comforting. Just there. She began to dream of places she'd never seen, a stairwell that turned forever, a mirror with no reflection, a room filled with dry leaves and humming. She began to write. The words came easily, though she could never remember what she'd written the next day. Her notebook filled with poems and fragments and stories she never planned. She kept writing. The villagers noticed she no longer came to town. No one knocked on the door. The old woman had been strange, they said. The girl was strange too. They whispered, but not like the field. Years passed. The cottage grew older. The porch began to lean. The wind wore deep grooves into the wood. But the candle in Mara's window still flickered each night, a little dimmer each year. One winter evening, a child from the village dared to walk to the hollow. He came running back an hour later, pale and shivering, eyes wide. There was someone standing in the middle, he said. She was singing, but no one believed him. Not really. They told him it was just the wind, just the old trees, just the dreams of a tired village boy. But when the snow melted that spring, the footprints appeared again. Bare, narrow, facing the village. And farther in, at the center of the field, was the faintest dip, like something below had moved, or maybe had always been waiting. She came alone, with only a suitcase, a lantern, and a cat as black as the shadows in the eaves. No one knew much about her. She was quiet, polite, and when asked why she'd chosen the mirror house, she simply said, "It feels like it's waiting." That first night, the villagers watched from their windows as a faint light flickered in the attic window, something that hadn't glowed in decades. The next day, smoke drifted from the chimney like a soft ribbon against the sky. Elsie spent her days gathering branches from the woods and drying herbs along the windowsills. She rarely spoke. She often walked through the fields at dusk, her coat trailing behind her, her cat perched on her shoulder like a second set of eyes. Inside the house, the silence had a shape. A weight. But Elsie didn't mind it. She liked quiet things. She didn't even find it strange at first that no mirror in the house would show her reflection. There were mirrors, of course. Tall, cracked ones in the halls. Oval ones hung near the stairs. A round one in the bedroom where the glass had gone slightly green with age. But when she passed them, they showed nothing at all. Not darkness. Not blur. Just a faint shimmer as though the glass were only pretending. She thought it was the light. Or the age of the glass. She tried not to think about it. Until she noticed her cat didn't reflect either. She held him up in front of the mirror one morning. He stared at it, then looked away, disinterested. But in the glass, there was only the wall behind him. The mirror swallowed everything. She left the room slowly. That night, the house began to creak more than usual. Not the way old houses sigh in the wind. This was measured, rhythmic, almost breathing. Elsie lay awake under her blanket, the cat curled beside her. The sound seemed to come from below, from beneath the floorboards, from beneath the earth. A slow inhale, a slower exhale. She rose without lighting the lantern, walked the hallway by feel. The mirrors didn't see her pass. In the kitchen, she stood still and listened. The breathing slowed, stopped. She touched the mirror above the sink. The glass was warm. The house with no reflections. At the edge of an old forest where the trees thinned into open fields, there stood a house that looked as though it had been built only to be forgotten. Its wood had turned gray with time, softened by decades of quiet rain and lichen, and the windows, though intact, were always dim, like the house preferred shadows to light. The villagers called it the mirror house, though no one could recall why. Children dared each other to run up and touch its porch, but few ever made it past the rusted gate. It wasn't haunted, they said. It was simply wrong. Like a dream you forget as soon as you wake but feel unsettled by all day. It had been empty for longer than anyone remembered. But one autumn, as the leaves began to fall and the days turned cool and gold, someone moved in. Her name was Elsie. The next morning, the village was mist-wrapped. No one saw Elsie. Her chimney smoked as always. Her curtains moved gently in the breeze. But inside, the house had changed. Where once there had been dust and cobwebs, now there was a kind of order. The mirrors, once idle, began to shift. Slight warps in their surfaces, as if they were waking up. She could feel them watching her. Not malicious, not curious, just aware. She tested them again. Held a candle before one. No flame reflected. Then she held her hand to the glass. And the mirror gave. Not like breaking. Not like shattering. It moved. Like skin. She pulled her hand away. There was no mark. That night, she dreamed of water. She stood at the edge of a still lake beneath a sky with no stars. The surface of the water was so perfect, it reflected nothing. Not even her. From beneath, something rose. Not a figure. Not a monster. Just a shape. A sense. Like a thought trying to become real. She stepped back. The lake spoke. Not with words, but with the memory of silence. The kind that fills a house when someone has just left and will never return. She woke with the taste of iron on her tongue. The cat stared at her, tail flicking once. A week passed. The mirrors grew stranger. They began to shimmer at odd angles. Sometimes she would glance and see movement, though nothing in the house had changed. One afternoon, as twilight fell across the fields, She passed the tall mirror in the hall and saw something shift in the corner of her eye. Not her reflection, but a room. The same hallway, the same mirror, but the light was wrong, colder, thinner, and someone stood at the far end of it, just out of view. She stepped closer. The figure didn't move. It didn't have to, because it was her. And it wasn't. She placed a cloth over the mirror. But at night, she could feel it watching through the fabric. The breathing returned, deeper now, not beneath the house, but within it. When she walked from room to room, her steps didn't echo, but someone else's did. One behind, always just one. The cat hissed at mirrors now, low and constant. Elsie began to speak to them, not out loud, just in thought. And sometimes they answered, not in words, not in sound, but in feeling, warmth, pressure, the sense of being seen, understood, welcomed. On the final night, there was no wind, no sound. The house was still. She lit the candle and walked to the bedroom mirror. She did not cover it. She stood before it for a long time. Then she stepped forward, and the glass opened like water. There was no splash, no resistance, just the hush of entry. Her cat remained behind, sitting still on the rug. The mirror showed nothing, and everything. The house was quiet, and in the village, they said the house finally felt complete again. No longer hollow, no longer waiting, but no one dared go inside, because when the sun hit the upper window just right, they swore they saw movement. Not a reflection, a shadow, smiling,